Hello and welcome back. My name is Jennifer and I make stuff. And in this video I'm going to show you how to make a gothic inspired taxidermy. So I have a wooden picture frame here that is looking like mahogany wood with a strip of gold around the frame. And as you can see, I only have a piece of black cardstock that is going to be the background for this taxidermy. And to decorate this wooden frame, I actually have this bison skull that I gave a makeover in another video that I uploaded a couple of months ago. And to add more of those Victorian-inspired elements, I have some of these metal book corners that has some nice ornate details on them. And to enhance more of that framed taxidermy that has some of this floral arrangement on them, I have this mixture of wild plants and flowers and some branches just to enhance more of that kind of darker, a little bit spooky elements instead of being like bright floral arrangements. So before I do anything else, I'm going to mark out where I want the skull to be attached after I have added all of those plants and other decorative arrangements inside the frame. And I'm also marking out where I'm going to add the hole for the screw that is going to help attach the skull to the frame, just to make sure that it has a secure attachment and doesn't fall off. And since some of these plants have very long stems on them, I decided to trim them down so it would be easier to create a decorative arrangement around the frame and around the skull. So I decided to start with the plants that could be easily bent into shape so they could be more of a curve to them that is going to add a framed look around the skull. And these ones I first attached just by placing them behind the wooden frame so they would be locked in place. And when I was happy with the placement, I decided to start adding some other decorative details. And these ones I decided to glue down using just a little bit of Mod Podge and just stippling it onto the surface using a sponge. Then I just placed the plant onto the surface and pressed it down for a couple of seconds until it started to stick into place. And then I just repeated this step until I got more of a fullness to the arrangement and also this shape that I'm going for that is giving me more of a bow-like shape that is following the flow that is going around the skull that I'm going to attach later. And from time to time I'm temporarily placing the skull onto the surface of the frame just to make sure that I'm not adding too many plants or something that is going to cover up the skull. I just want to make sure that I have it framed around the skull but doesn't make the skull just disappear or getting lost in all of these details. I still want it to be more of a frame around the skull and also making it stand out. And as you can probably tell, I started with all the larger pieces of the plants and florals that I had. And that would make it easier for me later when I'm going to add more of a fullness and adding more details where I feel like they are looking a bit lost, or if it looks a little bit like an empty space or a little bit too flat. It would just be easier for me to start with the larger pieces and then start adding smaller pieces to build up this kind of nice looking arrangement and fullness to this decorative part of this taxidermy. So when all the larger pieces were in place, I started to add some of the smaller plants and wildflowers that I had, just to fill those empty areas that were on the frame. So I can just trim them down, add a little bit of glue to them, add them to the placement where I want them attached, and then just start build up with more and more of these smaller pieces until I get to the fullness and shape that I'm going for. And one thing I did just to make sure that all of these plants and flowers are going to keep the shape and the color and all that, especially when you think about all these green pieces and all of those tiny lilac flowers. I decided to go over with a couple of layers of fixative spray, and this really helped to make sure that the arrangement that I have here will keep its shape and all the colors won't change over time. And it also helped a lot if there were some of these plants that have these tiny seeds on them that might fall off if you start to blow on them, or just moving around this entire frame. Just spraying a bit of fixative made sure that they stayed in place much better. So to attach the bison skull, I'm going to create a hole for the screw using this stitching awl, and I'm also using the diamond shaped stitching awl to widen the hole a bit. And as you can see, I'm using a pretty short screw for this bison skull because it had the same threads, but it turns out that this screw was a little bit too short and a little bit hard for me to attach through the backside of the picture frame. So off camera I replaced it with a longer screw that had the same threads, and this one was much easier for me to use, and it worked perfectly and made sure that the skull stayed in place. And after that was done, I just attached the backside of the picture frame. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want to enhance more of that kind of Victorian look to this taxidermy frame, so I'm going to use some of these metal book corners. But as you can see, they are silver chrome, and that was not going to fit with the style I'm going for. So I'm going to give this one a new paint finish. So the layering effect that I'm going to do here is first add 2 coats of the black chalk paint, let it dry. And after that was done, I added a dry brush coat using a acrylic paint in burnt umber mixed in with some of the soft pastels that I had in these orangey bright red tones to get more of a rusty look to these metal corners. And then to enhance more of that rusty effect, I just added more of those orangey red tones to this mixture to add even another layer for some more intense effects. And then to finish it off, to give it more of that metal look to it, I added a thin layer of golden wax using the dry brush technique. And then to protect all of these layers, I just added a thin layer of finishing wax. And this one I applied in a stippling motion using a sponge. And then to attach the ornate metal corners to the picture frame, I just added a thin layer of contact glue on the back side of the metal corners and then just press them down for a couple of seconds until they were set in place. I also added a little bit of the Mod Podge behind the skull because it was leaning down a bit and I wanted it to set flat against the black cardstock background. And then to make sure that these pieces that I had added glue to wouldn't lift or anything during the time the glue was drying, I added some of these heavier objects to make sure that they would stay flat and stick to the surface. And then as a final step, I decided to mix some Mod Podge with some water because I wanted to add some interesting textures to both the picture frame, just to give it something else instead of just being a plain wooden frame, but also I wanted the background to have a little bit more of a deeper tone, but also some interesting textures. I just decided to add a little bit of a mist with this watered down Mod Podge mixture to add some interesting textures and see what kind of unique look I could get with this effect. And that's the finished result. That's how I created this homemade framed taxidermy. It was a very easy project to actually make and it wasn't that many steps to do. It's all up to you how complicated or how simple you want it to look, depending on the interior that you have at home. I wanted something that looked a little bit more cottagecore, but those darker gothic elements to it. So that's why I used this picture frame and wild plants arrangement. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.